Great Torah.
Okay, so welcome everyone. And by the way, it'll be interesting to see, I have changed the settings. I didn't realize I could do this. I was playing with Zoom. So I think on the recording, it will eliminate people's names from the recording. There is apparently a setting on Zoom. We'll see if it works. Bryce.
Oh, I'm sorry, hit the wrong button.
Okay. So the subject tonight is circumcision, and the article I thought was interesting. Rather than a general take on circumcision, the title of the article, which we'll read in a second, is "Circumcision is the Foreskin a Defect?" And this is a question I get a lot, particularly from people who are opposed to circumcision, that why would we mutilate a perfectly healthy baby boy? And so that's what the article is going to address. And, I think they do, like Torah.com. The articles are always a little bit long, but very thorough. So we'll get into that. Anybody, I've been fascinated by the fact that of all the things that Reform Judaism got rid of, they never got rid of circumcision. Let them eat pepperoni, but don't forget the knife.
And particularly because they got rid of most things that are gender different. They're different that are
yeah. That's even although yes. So that is true. I would say the Reform movement, as it progressed, became conscious of not embracing gender differences. That certainly has not been true, over the 145 years of Reform Judaism. But recently, we've embraced gender neutral prayer books and gender neutral translations of Bible, and women rabbis and mixed seating. And actually, to that very point, there is in the rabbi's manual, and I do this all the time, there is a ceremony, and it goes by various names, but one is Brit Bat, which is, the covenant of a daughter. And the ceremony, aside from any surgery, is pretty much identical to the prayers that you would use with a boy at circumcision. But I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I don't know a single Reform rabbi who is opposed to circumcision. I know many Reform rabbis who would not insist on children being circumcised, whatever that means. I don't even know how we would know. If a couple has a baby, the baby may be circumcised in a hospital, but I don't know. I don't know any Reform rabbis who would ask, I'd like to see the Brit Milah certificate. And even in conversion, I would say in the Reform world, generally circumcision is optional for male converts to Judaism. I assume that there are some Reform rabbis who would insist on circumcision for a convert. I don't know of any who are against circumcision, and that's always kind of surprised me. So a lot of times before we dive into an article, I'm curious if you have questions or comments on circumcision and your own experience with that world.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say your own experience with circumcision. But
yeah, right. Yeah, the old joke. I couldn't walk for a year after mine.
Yeah, I just a quick comment. I mean, just a very practical comment. It's one of the reasons why, and I'll give a maybe deeper reason, but one of the reasons why I think it still sticks around is because the person making the decision isn't the one getting the circumcision.
Very true. And in the case of bar and bat mitzvahs, certainly in my family, the bar and bat mitzvah didn't have a role in doing that. But yes,
no.
Yes.
And I wonder if in the Muslim faith, if less people do opt for it, because then you have to do it when you're older. I think they do it when they're 12 or something like that, right?
It varies by culture. There's no,
Okay.
I think as you,
back east.
I'm sorry, Julie, I don't know if you're speaking to us or somebody else.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay.
Right. So anyway, but so you know what I'm
Y-
saying? I mean,
Yeah, and
I'm just wondering,
in
that may
Islam
be-
it varies. In Judaism,
Okay,
it's
but
on
that's not
the
my
eighth
point.
day. Yes.
The point is, just because the person's older, regardless of what the age is, it may impact the decision, right? So
Yes.
I think that's a big part of it. You know, you're doing this thing. It's not happening to you. It's happening to your son, and it happened to you. So you're like, okay, I'm just going to do it. It's not really a big deal. And also it's a little bit of a hedge too, right?
No
You
skin
know,
off my nose.
Exactly. It's a little bit of a hedge
you
against.
know,
I don't
Bryce,
know
I
what
thought of that one and I didn't say it.
what do you mean by it's a hedge?
Well, you know, maybe some people, you talked about reform and whatnot, or some people may be quasi-religious or, you know, feel culturally Jewish, but not practicing. And they
Mhm.
figure, look, you know what, I'm going to have this done, you know, with my child in case whatever I do in the future, I'm, you know, covered, that kind of thing. Now, I just want to make one more comment. You mentioned you don't know Reform rabbis that I know some Reform rabbis feel very, very strongly about it and would really be hesitant to admit someone to the congregation, a male to the congregation, if they were not circumcised.
So, and now you're talking about in the case of conversion.
No.
So, how would they know? Or
Oh, they asked.
Oh.
Like somebody applies to come to the temple. They want to join. Were you circumcised? They asked the question.
really? Okay, I've never heard of that. That's interesting. But again, I will stand with the reverse of that. I don't know any Reform rabbis who are opposed to circumcision.
Oh,
And
opposed to it.
yeah, and I know of Reform rabbis who pointedly will not wear a yarmulke, or even a talit,
Right.
and you know other what we would say liberal or Reform practices. But circumcision seems to have a special hold on Jews and Judaism, and you know, and I find that almost anthropologically very interesting. Okay.
Well, I have a granddaughter. I have to, I may be telling secrets, but anyway, she's very free. She's with men, she's very free. And she told me, she's not Orthodox, but she told me she would rather be with a man who is circumcised. She enjoys being with him better. So there you
Okay.
go.
Okay. So yeah, I'm glad that your name won't appear on the video.
No, don't, no.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, don't send the link for this particular course. Yes. And of course there's a lot of discussion about, which I think is generally supportive of circumcision for health reasons, and at least in the United States, circumcision was almost universal for many years. I think that's less true now than it once was, but I don't have statistics. Okay, so let me jump to our article. And I presume we can see it. Yes. We see it? Yes. Okay. Okay. So circumcision, is the foreskin a defect? Circumcision seemingly maims the body, yet ancient Jewish and rabbinic interpretation present it as actually perfecting the body. So this may be a different perspective. And there's, I guess, from the Jewish Museum, a circumcision set, different kinds of tools.
They don't look like that today.
No, they don't look like that today. Although, you know, I don't know if in very traditional communities they look like that. And there's all kinds of interesting things we can talk about. The techniques of circumcision, and that's I think we once did a class on circumcision. So this one is presenting the discussion from a different perspective. So would someone like to begin to read? Bryce, you are our reader of default, if you are willing to do that.
Sure, no problem.
Okay.
Circumcision is presented in Genesis as being a sign of the covenant. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you.
Okay.
Beyond that,
Okay. Let me just point out a couple of words. The word to circumcise is mol, and it's, you know, a complicated verb here, unim maltem. But circumcision is milah, and the word bris, which most of us know, is really the Ashkenazi way of pronouncing brit, which means covenant. So technically the ceremony is brit milah or bris milah, I guess in Ashkenazi it would be bris milah. But bris refers to covenant, not specifically to circumcision. Okay, let's continue. Beyond.
Beyond that, the biblical cupboard is bare of information about its symbolism, how or why it functions as a covenant sign, and what is problematic about the foreskin. Later Jewish texts fill in this vacuum with a range of interpretations, one of which is to see the foreskin as a physical defect or disability, with circumcision as a rite with curative powers. Noah was a righteous, let's see, where?
No,
walk,
sorry.
Where are we?
Walk before me and be tamim.
Walk before me and be tamim. Genesis 17 opens with God commanding Abraham, walk before me and be tamim. In context, tamim is typically understood as denoting Abraham's moral standing and alignment with God and the divine will, consistent with the description of Noah in Genesis 6. Noah was a righteous man. He was tamim in his generation. Noah walked with God. The relationship in chapter 17 between God's statement to Abraham that he should be tamim and the practice of circumcision is far from clear. That said, the rabbis forge an integral interpretive link between them, arguing that if God tells Abraham to be constantly tamim and then charges him to circumcise himself and any male dependents, then it must be the circumcision that renders a man tamim.
And this is a typical Talmudic technique. If you have a statement and it's followed fairly quickly by another statement or a mitzvah or something, the rabbis are going to connect it.
Yeah, it seems okay. All right. By associative principle, if circumcision makes one tamim by removing the foreskin is by definition a
Mum.
A defect that compromises the physical integrity of a male and calls for correction to make the man whole. In a number of passages in Genesis Rabbah, wow, that's not English.
Yes.
Sorry.
It should be a number of.
Illustrate the rabbi's logic. A philosopher asked Rabbi Hoshai, what I meant was that's not a properly formed English sentence.
Yes, I agree with you.
Okay. A philosopher asked Rabbi Hoshaya, if circumcision is so valued, why wasn't it given to the first man? In other words, why wasn't Adam born circumcised? He said to him, anything created on the first 6 days of creation needs some work. Mustard seeds need sweetening. Lupine needs sweetening. Grain needs to be ground. Even humans require correcting.
I don't know what lupine is. Does anybody know?
Is supine the opposite?
Lupine needs, apparently it's something to eat, which is not very sweet, but I don't know. Just curious. Okay.
Rabbi Yudan said, just as this fig's only flaw is
Misulat, I guess. No, thisulat, sorry.
Thisulat, okay. Like thistle?
No, it's with a F.
Okay, okay. Is its stalk, remove it and eliminate the defect. Good. What is the word?
Probably bitul hamum. If I had my Hebrew speaker here, she would correct me.
Okay. Thus, the Holy Blessed One said to Abraham, you have no flaw except your foreskin. Remove it and eliminate the defect. Walk before me and be
Tamim.
There you go.
Okay. Why don't you read one more section? I'll see if I have another volunteer.
Rabbi Levi says it is like a matron to whom the king said, pass before me. She passed before him and her face blanched. She thought, what if some flaw is found on me? The king said to her, there is no flaw on you except an overgrown nail on your little finger. Remove it and eliminate the defect. Thus said the Holy One to Abraham, there is no flaw on you except this foreskin. Remove it and eliminate the defect and walk before me and be tamim.
Okay. Okay, would someone else like to read Moses' uncircumcised lips?
Sure.
Thank you.
The image of foreskin as a blemish finds support in other more metaphorical uses of the term in the Bible. For example, in Exodus 6:2 to 7:7, which contains the priestly iteration of God's call to Moses with the mission confronting Pharaoh and asking for the people's freedom. Hang on, I'm going to make this bigger.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. People's freedom. Moses pleads inability to accomplish the test because I have foreskinned lips.
And it's
So,
Aral
Oh,
Sifatayim.
wow. Yeah. Got it. You want, yeah. Shafatim. Shapatayim, right? That's what I was trying to make it
No,
bigger. You're leaning into. The Hebrew is very small.
Yeah, it's a sin, not a shin. It's
Can they use a larger font, perhaps?
yeah. Well, Safatayim. So it's
Yeah,
like Adonai.
Safatayim,
Yeah. Anyway, Sfat
Well, that's
is
what it
lips.
says. I have foreskin lips. Yeah. I
Yes.
mean, it's
Mhm.
yeah, okay. So, although the exact meaning of foreskin lips is never fleshed out, many interpreters construe it as a physical defect, an actual marring of Moses's mouth, and a speech disability, either as a consequence of a wound or in some other form, such as a stutter. See Pseudo Jonathan Neofiti. The notion of disability is reinforced by the parallel burning bush passage, which Moses protests that he is. Let's see. It looks like kavad.
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 Yeah. Chabad pei uchavad
Ukavad,
lashon.
heavy of mouth and heavy of tongue, right? Okay.
Mhm.
A Jewish etiology for Moses's condition is found in a number of places in which Moses, as an infant, burns his mouth by touching with a hot coal.
And I think some of us know that Midrash.
Yeah.
The magicians predict that Moses, baby Moses, in the Pharaoh's house, will cause trouble. I don't remember the exact story, but so they put before him two dishes, one filled with gold and shiny stuff, and the other with hot coals. And if I remember the Midrash correctly, Moses reaches toward the gold, and an angel pushes his hands toward the coals, and he burns his hand and brings it to his mouth, and he burns his lips. Because if he had reached toward the gold, then that would be a prediction that he would cause trouble.
I heard that when I was a child, and it scared me.
Okay, you please continue.
Sclerocardia, thickened heart. That's interesting. The foreskinned heart and the consequent promise to circumcise the heart of the Israelites offers another example of a biblical metaphor implying that the foreskin is problematic. Several key biblical passages use such metaphors as symbols of the Israelite people's collective corruption and apostasy, leading to alienation from God's favor, exile, and eventual redemption. For example, let's see.
Let's just do the English.
Yeah, Levy 2641. And if then their foreskin heart is humbled, and they will compensate for their iniquity.
Some more examples.
And then in Deuteronomy, circumcise the foreskin of your hearts and stiffen your necks no more. Jeremiah, circumcise yourselves to Adonai and remove the foreskin of your hearts.
Yeah, and I don't remember if they're going to get into this, but I always sort of interpreted these passages as the foreskin is something that sort of blocks what should not be blocked. It removes a covering that, according to Maxine's, granddaughter, ought to be removed. And in this case, the heart and lips and so on.
Yeah, as an aside, the Egyptians that believed that the heart, the center of the chest, was the center of intellect.
Yeah, and I think that's a biblical idiom also. And one of my classmates did his thesis on circumcision, and he pointed to, I guess, the fact that you can see in drawings from Egyptian times that the Egyptians practiced circumcision, and at least one of the theories is that we got that practice from Egypt.
They all did it. Everybody in the region did it.
Everybody where?
The whole region. They all did it.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah.
Not the Philistines. The Philistines were famous for not circumcising.
But if you go to Babylonia, I believe that they did, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
I have a question.
Yeah,
What
go ahead, Julie.
female circumcision?
Yeah, female circumcision which is a clitorectomy, is not circumcision. except sometimes it's called circumcision because it's you're surgically removing something, but it is nowhere referenced in Jewish tradition, and I don't even think it's referenced in Islam. It's a cultural custom, my understanding of which is to reduce the sexual pleasure of a woman, which presumably will keep her from straying. But that concept is never really addressed anywhere in Judaism. And I don't know, and there are different cultures that embrace it, and there's a worldwide movement to eliminate it. But okay, so Stephen, then Bryce.
Thank you.
Sort of flipping this question on its head a little bit, no pun intended. What is the purpose of the foreskin? And this is sort of two questions in one. One is, people who believe Genesis as literal truth, what do they believe was the reason that God created foreskins? Is it strictly so
Well, that's this whole discussion here.
Taking it off. And then the other part of the question, and this answer as a scientist, not as a rabbi, why in the course of evolution would people have or evolve to have foreskins? What is the biological function?
Protection.
I would guess exactly the same as Bryce, and that is protection.
Yeah, there's no clothing originally, right? So
Yeah, human beings evolved without clothing. So I mean, it's like what what are you going to do?
Yep. As
what
Mel Brooks would put it, you want to protect your gentle parts.
So what I wanted to mention was that I realize calling it female circumcision is simply to do some kind of an analogy, but it doesn't make sense. And the reason that it's circumcision means to cut around.
That's actually a good point. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So it's only going to work around some kind of a pillar of some kind, and so that doesn't exist in females.
Right. And of course, the
At least
term
not so that I've noticed.
Yes, the term.
Beg to differ with you.
Okay. So now I'll mention something which I was not going to mention, which I think is interesting from that point of view, and that is the clitoris is the only organ in humans whose sole purpose is pleasure. So put that on your. Just don't tell your granddaughter, Maxine. I think we've involved her enough. Okay, so let's continue with the metaphor, this metaphor.
Okay, so this metaphor is also part of a larger matrix of heart-centered sin and redemption tropes, best exemplified in Ezekiel 36:26. And I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove the heart of stone from your body and give you a heart of flesh. Readers, ancient and modern, have proposed a range of explanations for the foreskin heart metaphor, some abstract, Onkelos' foolish heart and Neophites' wicked heart, and some more concrete. Of the latter, the more common is an image of a dysfunctional, defective organ. Thus, John Hartley of Azusa Pacific Seminary comments prosaically, while taking license with physiology, the heart has become so hard that it has become encased in a hard growth like the foreskin. This condition requires surgery.
Yeah, so I think he's prosaic and metaphoric.
Prosaic, yeah.
But we talk about hardening your heart. I mean, Pharaoh hardening his heart, and I think actually in Hebrew there are two words used. One is like making it more weighty. I think kaved, and then strengthening the heart. Yeah.
Yeah, the weighting is interesting because, as Rabbi Lisa pointed out, Egyptians, when you die, they weighed your heart to see if you were going to make it into heaven or not. If you had a heavy heart, you didn't. You went down. You had a light heart, you went up.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm using that metaphorically, I suppose.
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
So that's where the heavy heart comes from, actually.
Okay, nice. Bryce.
I think we keep doing this kind of thing, and I'm going to get a little meta here, okay? But I think we keep doing this kind of thing, like, trying to figure out what thickened heart and trying to do all these analogies because we're analogizing creatures. Okay, we understand the world through analogies, and we're in many cases here, we're trying to make analogies where true analogies are not possible. And so we try to go to some kind of metaphorical analogy and so forth. But, you know, sometimes it's successful and sometimes it's not.
Yeah,
Maybe
so
it's-
go ahead, Stephen.
maybe the hardening isn't a metaphor at all. Maybe their knowledge of medicine is a lot more advanced than we realized. And what they're talking about was hardening of the arteries from too much cholesterol and people having heart
Yeah,
attacks.
I doubt that they were aware of that. But
Yeah, let's
but
go with
but
a big no on that.
but if we go with the idea that the
Preference
heart is
that
the seat of intelligence, then hardening your seat of intelligence, it's like hardening your mind, doesn't sound positive. And it sounds like someone who is not flexible, literally in their thinking and so on. So they're, you know, that at least works for me. And, you know, I would say metaphors, analogies, similes, shed some light on things that are being discussed, but clearly they are not to be taken literally.
If I could point out something about this idea of hardening of the arteries is the problem with being able to use that as an explanation is that there was no dissection. All right, you didn't have Jewish doctors taking bodies apart to see how they worked and see what was inside. It was just forbidden. So there was no way for people to learn about anything like that. People were just left alone and they just died.
Yeah, I'm actually not certain about that there was no dissection, but you might be right. I mean, in modern times, you would not do that, and that would be against Jewish law. But I think the rabbis had a fair amount of insight into more insight than we would think into biology. For example, I know that they knew that, you know, that the gender of a child was fixed before birth. And that was probably due to spontaneous abortions and miscarriages and so on. Okay. Jerry, you want to continue with Hartley's solution?
Sure. So Hartley's solution follows in the footsteps of the what's he got there?
LXX, that's the Septuagint.
Oh yeah, that's right.
You remember that's the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, and first the Torah and then the Bible.
Yeah, where they come up with the LXX from?
That's 70, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, the term Septuagint refers to 70,
yeah.
and the myth, which I don't believe for a minute, that either 70 individuals or small groups were each tasked with the challenge of translating the first Torah, then the Bible, into Greek. This is a Jewish translation, it's not a Christian translation. And lo and behold, they worked independently and all 70 translations were identical, leading to the theological presumption that the translations themselves were divinely inspired and you did not have to go back to the Hebrew. So I've been in settings with Greek Orthodox, for example, and they will go back to the Septuagint. And, when I suggest, well, let's look at the Hebrew, they will sort of look at me and think, why? Because it's actually, I think that's pretty important for Christianity, but that's why it is LXX. So,
okay, and by saying that gave me plenty of time to look at this. We'll render Arlot Levav Chem.
Levav Chem, yes.
Yeah, Deuteronomy 10:16 as sclerocardian uman, your thickened heart. While most of our circumcision texts are more tangibly constructed and concern the foreskin of an individual actor, the foreskin heart texts do situate the interpretation in the larger ideational field of foreskin as defect and disability, with circumcision as the corrective.
Okay. We get a lesson in English when we read these articles.
Apparently,
yes. Okay.
Born circumcised. Despite the Midrashic assertion in Genesis Rabbah 11:6 that men were born with foreskins in order to grant humanity a collaborative role in the creation process, God providing raw or flawed material that required perfection or completion, the authors Avot de Rabbi Natan take pains to emphasize that most biblical notables were born
Machol, I guess.
Machol. Okay, fully circumcised.
Machol,
right.
sorry.
They got to use a bigger font on that Hebrew. I don't know. Placed thus in state of bodily perfection. The list includes Job, Adam, Seth, Noah, Shem, Jacob, Joseph, Moses, Balaam, Samuel, David, Jeremiah, and Zerubbabel. The rabbis use various midrashic means to make this argument, including noting the use of the term Tom or Tamim regarding some of the individuals. For example, Noah in Genesis 6:9, cited above, and Job in 1:5. Most remarkably, the text asserts that Adam was born circumcised because he was created in God's image, implying that God is also embodied and circumcised. Through this, Aaron passage is at odds with Genesis Rabbah, especially as regards Adam. The sources are consistent in the notion that the foreskin is a defect and circumcision is a healing corrective that effectuates physical integrity.
So I will just note here that I've never actually encountered this, in a congregant, but when you read about circumcision, in kind of rabbinic rules, there is always a mention of what do you do if a child is born without a foreskin. So apparently that happens. And the answer is you draw a drop of blood from the site where the foreskin would be. And that is also true in what is a very common circumstance in men converting. And particularly in this country, I would say by far most men that have come to me for conversion have already been circumcised. And so there's a procedure called Hatafat Dam Brit, where you draw a drop of blood where the foreskin would be.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
What is all this focus on the male organ about?
Well, that's that. Yeah,
That's where the universe comes from.
So I mean, in the entire corpus of the Bible, there's not so much devoted to the male organ. But it is a sign. But clearly, in connection with circumcision, it is a sign. You might argue that women don't need it because they are already born perfect, and don't need the surgery to make them perfect.
Well, I think also the focus might be on it a little bit because all of the writers were male.
Oh yeah, I mean they are going to be concerned with it, and then as Jerry was saying, it was apparently very common in the geographic world in which these texts are being developed. So it's not surprising that the Jews would do it too, and the Jews are going to put a biblical commandment in there. The thing which I think is distinct about Jewish tradition is to do it at 8 days, and that's that is actually mentioned in the text. And the commandment Abraham was commanded to circumcise himself at age, I think he's 99 at that point in time, circumcise his son Ishmael, who is, I believe, 13, and then he's told to he is commanded to circumcise subsequent sons on the 8th day, and that becomes a very big deal in Jewish tradition. You will even have circumcisions on Yom Kippur and on Shabbat. You don't set it. The only reason you delay or don't do a circumcision is for medical reasons, but the commandment overrides Shabbat and Yom Kippur.
You can only do it on Shabbat or Yom Kippur if it actually is the 8th day. If it's been delayed for whatever medical
yes,
reason,
you're absolutely right.
and then the first day that you are medically able to do it happens to be Yom Kippur or Shabbat, then you have to wait one additional day.
Yes, you're absolutely right about that. If the circumcision has been delayed, then you would not do it on Shabbat or Yom Kippur. And doing it on Shabbat and Yom Kippur poses problems because you're not allowed to a mohel in Orthodox tradition can't transport his tools from one place to another, so he has to spend Friday night at the home, and then there's other interesting things because part of the
he'd have to leave his tools at the home Friday night, but he wouldn't necessarily have to spend the night there himself.
Yes, but he would have to walk to the home. Yes, you're absolutely.
Well, it's a lot of rules that people have added on. And Rabbi, I don't know if you were going to talk anything about the passage with Moses specifically with the flint knife and all that. Were you going to?
I don't think the article gets into that. Maybe it does. I just don't remember. Let's continue.
I just was going to point out that the point of the flint knife. Obviously, not the point of flint being very sharp, but it's a very ancient, very sharp knife, which
Yeah.
is a little indicative of how far back this probably goes.
Yes. Yep.
Well, flint
Okay.
is so sharp that it's still sometimes used in modern eye surgery.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Aye.
And volcanic glass too sometimes.
Yeah, it can take a sharper edge than steel.
Wow, that's interesting. I'm glad you told me that after I had cataract surgery.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Well, they probably just circumcised your eyes.
yes, if I would have known, I would have said the blessing. Okay, Jerry,
Feel free to hand it off to someone
yeah,
else if you want.
someone else
or
want to read, or Jerry, you can continue.
whatever you prefer. I don't care.
Hearing none,
All right,
why
just
don't you continue?
Keep going. All right.
Yeah.
Like the angels. In the passage on circumcision in Jubilees, God explains that Abraham and his descendants should be circumcised, since this would make them like angels in appearance. Jubilees 15:11-17. And the Lord said to Abraham, "You shall keep my covenant, you and your seed after you. You shall circumcise all of your males, and you shall circumcise your foreskin, and it will be a sign of the eternal ordinance between me and you. It is an eternal ordinance ordained and written in the heavenly tablets. Because the nature of all the angels of the presence and of all the angels of holiness was thus from the day of their creation. And in the presence of the angels of the presence and the angels of holiness, he sanctified Israel so that they might be with him and with the holy angels." The implication is clear. Angels who are by definition physically perfect are therefore circumcised. Jewish males, in order to emulate that physical perfection, must also be circumcised and their defect, the foreskin, removed. Opacity and apologetics.
Painful process. It's gotta
Sorry?
be very painful, right? It's painful.
Yes. So, what I would say is, I, you know, in all the circumcisions for which I have been present, which are quite a few, an anesthetic, a local anesthetic, is injected into the foreskin of the baby, and I personally don't notice any immediate reaction to the cutting of the foreskin. There's a reaction to the baby kind of being pinned down in an uncomfortable position and being cold and maybe even to the injection of the anesthesia. But what I would say is I do know several men who have been circumcised. Now I've been anesthesia in those also, not general anesthesia, but local anesthesia. And they didn't seem to feel the circumcision at all, but I have been told by these men that the recovery is actually very painful.
Yes.
And I've also been told, and I don't know, that in the 8th day, there isn't a lot of blood vessels formed in the foreskin, and there aren't a lot of nerve endings that have been formed in that area. But by the 8th day, the clotting factor has kicked in. So it's actually a very good time to do a circumcision. My guess is that in cultures where young men, and it's quite often a puberty rite of passage circumcision, and my guess is that it's pretty painful and pretty bloody. But
Well, I've been to a bris, for an 8th day baby, and that baby screams.
yes,
I hear
but
the baby scream, and it bothers me. I hate that.
I understand, and babies will cry, and particularly, depending on the technique used by the mohel, there's typically a board, which, it's kind of like Velcro straps for the arms and the legs so that the baby doesn't move. And the baby is clearly uncovered to a large degree. So I think the baby is reacting to that. I personally have never noticed a screaming reaction to the cutting itself from the baby. From other people in the room, yes, but not from the baby. Okay, opacity and apologetics.
Opacity and apologetics. So the foreskin as defect and circumcision as healing equation seems to have been generated by a confluence of internal and external pressures. As a matter of hermeneutics, readers were faced with the Torah's virtual silence regarding the implications of circumcision and the possessing a foreskin. Moreover, they had to make sense of a package of metaphors that were at best opaque. From the outside, the Jewish community was challenged by the wholesale stigmatization of circumcision in the Greco-Roman world. The anti-circumcision polemic ran the gamut from ridicule to outright hostility, with the ritual being considered as an act of barbarity on par with castration. Tradition needed an answer, and the disability framework was ideal. No, the text argued, we are not injuring an infant or compromising the integrity and beauty of his body. Rather, we are surgically correcting a defect. We are improving, not harming. This rhetoric also allowed for a potent theological valence. We are God's partners in the creation and perfection of the human form.
Yeah, and I would say that last sentence, let's see, I don't know if I have the footnotes, so it's number 14. Let's go down. The spirit of, that's a French word, and my French is not good, is worth noting that the modern anti-circ movement borrowed from the Hellenistic playbook and has branded circumcision an act of violence perpetrated on innocent infants. While many have pushed back by insisting on religious freedom, some in the Jewish and medical community have made the case for circumcision's health benefits, echoing the ancient Jewish position articulated here, that circumcision corrects a defect. So that last sentence, though, is generally, I would say, the thrust of opinion that the tradition argues that just as the world needs fixing, tikkun olam, that is symbolically also true in a male human body. It needs fixing and correcting. My colleague who did his rabbinic thesis on circumcision argued that if there's one place in a male's body where we need to be reminded of the covenant with God and with ethics, it is right there. I'm not sure that it's very effective in that particular role. So that's pretty much, that's the article on circumcision. I don't know that I ever did my circumcision song for you folks. Did I?
Oh,
The birthday, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Jerry knows this because it was in one of the shows that I wrote. So, and I've actually done these at circumcisions from time to time, but I use my discretion. So here we go. It's called Bris Day, for your bris. Hi world, I'm feeling fine. There's nothing special on my mind. How could there be? I'm only 8 days old, and everyone's saying it's my bris day. Ba-da-da-da-da-da. What's a bris day? Well, now who's that little old man? He looks nice, but he's got cold hands. He's yanking down my brand new pants. And everyone's moaning because it's my bris day. Ba-da-da-da-da-da-da. What's a bris day? Every guy in the room is starting to schwitz. They got me sucking on Manischewitz. Wanna scratch my nose and kick my feet. Hey, but I can't move them. Hey, what's this bris day? Bum, 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 slow down. You're moving too fast. I want this little thing to last. I have a feeling it's important to me. Ow! You'll never believe what they did on my bris day. Thank you. I'm here all week. Tell your friends, or don't tell your friends as your judgment directs you. So next week, I think I just picked out, let me see if I can find next week, I am not here. I'm actually giving a talk at a Catholic church. And in 2 weeks, I found a discussion, nice article, excuse me, on the death penalty in Jewish tradition. Oh, sorry. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Rabbi.
And
thank you.
okay, take care.
Thank you and good night, everyone.
Stay safe.
Rabbi, thank you.